what you see in the top here is Baghdad.
And yeah, Fallujah, some other areas that you won't know yet, but hopefully you will here shortly. But some of the objective saints, also known as Saddam International Airport, right here. So just on the southwest side of Baghdad. Iskandaria, objective Peach, where we cross the Euphrates River. Karbala, natural choke point. Got the water hazards, if you will, the lake on the west side. As I was telling guys before this, I never saw that lake. I mean, I went like half a kilometer past it, I think. I never actually saw a lake, but it was dark early morning, and I think we were turned every which way. But there's Karbala, the city, one of the most holy sites of Shia Islam, and basically what started the Shia-Sunni civil war is when the shrine in Karbala temple was blown up in 2005. Going south, there's a terrain feature called there's Najaf and there's the Najaf escarpment. Najaf is a city, okay, another holy site. The escarpment, it shoots straight up like this. Probably, I don't know, maybe I'd say straight up like that. Not like the Hershey Park roller coasters I was at yesterday like that, but about like this for about 95 feet or so. So a natural area where you'd think that the Iraqis would defend and try to stop us. This goes down, this doesn't even get down towards Al-Samwa and Nasiriyah, which is still 100 or so miles north of the Kuwaiti border. So if I were continuing this along, I'd be in Kuwait right about here. Okay? So that's your basic map orientation. Okay, so as I talk about this, and you've seen sort of the other things up front here, and that's the map. I can point to the map and kind of, you generally know what I'm talking about. So, as I said before, this really started, let me dial back. It started for me back in August of 1990 when I had just graduated basic training, AIT, went to Germany to be part of an army that was part of the post-Cold War, right? Soviet Union was starting to dismantle, and I was having a great assignment in Germany, and there's nothing to worry about, right? I mean, what could go on? What could be better than being in the army of Europe when we had 2 corps, several 100,000 troops in Germany, West Germany, and things were coming together. And then Saddam invades Kuwait, and we get alerted, and I go to Desert Storm as part of the 2nd Corps Support Command, and that started sort of my experience with Iraq and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
So you were in Germany at the time?
So, yep. So I was in Germany at the time. We were alerted, I think about September, October of that year, that we would deploy in support of what soon became, known as Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And I didn't do anything during the war. There's no cool stuff. I was a land combat support system test specialist. I worked on TOW, Dragon, Lance, and Shillelagh missile systems, on the optical sites, on the missile guidance systems, the packages. So when the guy firing a missile at an enemy tank want to make sure that he hits what he's pointing at, that's what I worked on. I wasn't the guy pointing it. I was the guy that worked on that system. But we went, and we were still, there's always risk of deploying. This was a new thing for our Army. We had NCOs who were post-Vietnam, did not participate in Grenada, did not participate in Panama. Those were both very limited, and unless you're an airborne ranger type, you didn't do that. I was put in my truck and told to follow the truck in front of me, and that's how I'd know where I was going.
How old were you?
So in 90, I was 21. In 91, so just turned 22 after the invasion. The land fight had begun for Desert Storm. And I just say that because some of those memories, flashing forward as a commander, are things I wanted to kind of try to fix if I could, at very limited ability to do that as a company commander. but some of the things that I knew that we needed to work on. The other was, so you always have to have some hilarious stories, right? So we deployed Christmas Eve out to the desert. Commander stops after hours and hours and hours of driving and says, this is our spot. Plants the guidon. This is the guidon, right? He had a different guidon. And he planted his guidon in the sand and said, this is where we're staying. And I slept on top of my truck that night. But before that, I got to get my first meal in a while. And as I went through the MKT, the mobile kitchen trailer where our cooks fixed all the lovely food like you guys are eating right now. So as I get my tray and I turn and I'm exiting, unlike everyone else who takes a right, I take a left, about here, into the pit of grease, where they had dug the pit. So, gotta love these stories, right? And so, you got to find humor in all these things, and so in these adventures. So, anyways, the other thing is the being under chemical attack. Our alarms went off one night, and everyone went into full chemical protective gear, and I started to hyperventilate and tell myself I had breathed before I put my mask on. So then I thought, tightness in chest, difficulty in breathing. I'm going through all the procedures and all the steps of knowing that I'm under duress. I'm probably suffering from nerve agent poisoning or whatever, you know. And I wasn't, of course. So after Desert Storm was finished, I said, the Army's great, I love it, but I want to be an officer, so I went through officer candidate school. And so now we move forward, and I talked a little bit about the Haiti mission. That's not tonight's story. Talking about the Kosovo mission. So in 2001, we deployed, January of 2001, we deployed to Kosovo for a stability ops mission of sorts. You know, we were starting to do this all over the Balkans. We had been promised that we'd be in and out and done. Bosnia was going on at that point for 5 or 6 years, I think. In Kosovo, we were already on rotation 3 alpha, meaning that there were 5 rotations or so, 4 rotations ahead of us. Interestingly, we did study about a guy named Osama bin Laden and his group Al Qaeda, because they were running drugs through the Balkans. And if anyone knows, Kosovo and Albania, predominantly Muslim nation, and there's nothing wrong with that in itself. It was just happened to be an area where there was a movement of fighters as well as drugs. So we actually did know a little bit about that. There were other organizations in there trying to disrupt both of those flows. On 9/10/2001, I went to Bulgaria. Sofia, Bulgaria is part of my rest and recreation, R&R. Spent a few days there out of the line, get a break, and on 9/11, of course, the attack occurred. They were initially going to fly us via Chinook helicopters. Those are the big ones with the 2 rotors, and they were going to fly us out and figured that was too dangerous to do that, too high of a profile. There was about 100 and something of us, I guess, so that would have been a lot of aircraft as well to try to fly us out. So they actually allowed us to stay for limited R&R, and then we went back, and immediately everyone started to theorize on what was next. So I was commanding a headquarters company of an armor battalion at the time. That was my first command. I commanded it for just under 2 years. And so in Kosovo, I learned all about the normal stuff of peacekeeping. You do a lot of patrols, a lot of checkpoints. You do a lot of fixed site security, a lot of reconnaissance, oversight of areas that are pretty important, like Christian churches that the Kosovo Albanians keep trying to bomb and vice versa, that sort of stuff. But we were primarily in our Humvees and whatnot. We did have our tanks there, and they were firing, they were maintaining their skills on their tanks in Kosovo. I remember Christiane Amanpour was there, and I escorted her through one of our gunnery ranges as we talked about how this was potentially going to prepare us and make us more ready for any other missions that may occur because of 9/11. After I got back to the States from Kosovo, a few months later I did a change of command, and I took command of Alpha Company 3rd Battalion, 69th Armor. So that is this one. And so a company is generally 60 to 100 and something people or so. My first command, I had 305. I went backwards, so I guess I wasn't doing so well. And I got command of a tank company of 63 people. So tank company has 3 platoons, 4 tanks each, the executive officer's tank and the commander's tank. So 14 tanks, a fire support team that's not organic but is always there for training and operations. A small maintenance team that was mine in the headquarters company and again organized for the fight, and all the other logistics that could be organized from the battalion. The company, everyone started to get a sense that we were going to deploy. This was 2002, early 2002 or so, and the company did not do well. The prior commander just had some challenges. They did not qualify their tanks. They just were having discipline problems and other things. So I think I was brought in to kind of help with that. Either that or I truly was being punished and going down in the scope and scale of role and responsibility. But no, we trained, and we trained a lot. I remember our family readiness group, and the wives were really mad at me because I kept the wives or their husbands out in the field all the time. And at one point we had a meeting and they're yelling at me, and I'm like, my job is to bring your husband home safe if we go on a mission, to accomplish the mission, bring him home safe, alive, back to you. I'm sorry if that means no weekends and everything else. So that was going on really through late spring 2002. And I was at Fort Stewart, Georgia. Not a lot of maneuver space for tanks to begin with. It's an odd place really for armor brigades and mechanized brigades, really. But there were 2 brigades on that post. At the time, there were 2 brigades. So there was 3 armor battalions and 3 mechanized infantry battalions, as well as an artillery brigade, a logistics brigade, and all signal, military intelligence, all the other things.
Remind us again about the size of a brigade versus the size of a battalion.
Yeah, so the battalion is about 495 to 600 for the armor and infantry battalions, and the brigades are at that time probably, again, it depends on if you're task organized, anywhere between 3,200 and 4,500. And so division commander, 2-star general commands brigades. Brigades are led by 06 colonels. Battalions are led by lieutenant colonels, and then companies are by captains. I was a senior captain at the time because of my enlisted time and because I commanded the other company first. I was very senior going into this command, but we all anticipated that we were going to war, and so they were making all sorts of exceptions for keeping people in place and extending commands and that sort of stuff. So I'll skip forward a little bit. We started to prepare in detail in our National Training Center. So if anyone's been out to Fort Irwin, California, massive desert, for most soldiers, commanders, units in the Army have been out there, especially mounted type units, and you prepare for war. You go over and over and over, you drill, but in scenarios, situations, not like marching type drilling. So you practice your mission command, you practice your maneuver, you practice putting artillery fires in combination with movement of tanks and infantrymen to secure, destroy objectives, seize objectives, clear objectives. For our rotation, they classified it and they actually prepared it to look like Iraq, to look like this fight right here, as best as they could. And so what that meant was there was at least a couple fights where we had to fight through more urban terrain than you normally would out at the National Training Center, big open desert. And also they created this causeway, this big old route right here, especially going through Najaf Escarpment. So remember I said it goes up like this, on either side of it, soft mud. And I think I have a picture somewhere where someone forgot that, they went off into it and they're stuck. So at the National Training Center, anyone, while we're doing this training, anyone who did that was killed by the observer controllers, said, no, you can't do that. So they're trying to prepare us for the fight. The idea is to make your training more realistic, harder than what you will face in reality, wherever it is that you go on a deployment or mission. And it was really good. And to be honest, way I started talking to you about, I was about to say we engaged and destroyed 3 targets at. That is that sort of training. You get it into your head that you're just at the range. But like I said, we're not at the range. We're actually shooting at people. I had, later on, I'm kind of jumping ahead on this a little bit, but later on I had one of my staff sergeants report that they had observed civilians on the battlefield. We're in Baghdad, population of, I don't know, 4, 5, 10 million. And he's reporting civilians on the battlefield, because out in the desert of National Training Center, you wouldn't have that. If you had that, it would be an interesting sight, and you probably want to report that to your higher. So that's how the training was kicking in. And so the idea was to get muscle memory, okay, develop some of that operational excellence. And quick aside on that, yeah. As a young commander, I was kind of offended when my battalion commander said, "Hey, Chuck, you worry about doing whatever it is I tell you to do it the best you can. Let me and my staff worry about what you do." And I was like, "Whoa, I'm a commander." No. And it is very important to understand who owns the why, the what, and the how. Now, I clearly did not own the why nor the what. All right? Why we're doing, what we're doing. He said, "You focus on the how." Right? Operational excellence. No innovation down at my level, unless it's absolutely called for. So that's an important lesson I took with me, so that's what I did, and that's what we do is you train in your factories and your assembly lines or whatever business process. You try to eliminate variance, maximize your efficiency, so you can save the margins that are there, or save your soldiers or whatever if we're talking about the battlefield. So that's a long list. So we deployed in early January of 2003. And my wife was pregnant at the time, so with our first child, so she was out to here. I left her at the curb. I didn't want to take her into my company area because I had to worry about all these other guys who had their wives there. And so I left her at the curb, got in the car, and left, and she'd go pick up my car later. And we got to, got in and went through the normal procedures of drawing out all of our weapons and all of our night vision goggles and all the things we draw out every time we got in the field to go do a training exercise or something like that. But this time we also loaded our duffel bags and everything else. And we had loaded up most of the big equipment already. They had been shipped and sent to Kuwait in advance. So we took all that stuff, our individual fighting gear, and we deployed. I remember doing an interview. My wife did an interview, so it seemed like we were kind of in the news a lot. This is new, again. So we're back to being new because Afghanistan had been going on now for a little bit, but that was primarily airborne forces again, and not armored forces, mechanized forces like what we had. So the news was all over the place, and spotting a pregnant crying woman is a great news story. But I say that, but just within a year, that was a common story. And then we did it over and over and over for 10 years almost, really. I mean, we're still doing it. We're still having soldiers leaving behind pregnant, wives, mothers, taking care of the families and all that. So, that's just something to always keep in mind, part of that human story, obviously. So we get into Kuwait and we draw equipment from pre-positioned equipment storages there in Kuwait. It was just like they said it was going to be, and I think we're out in 6.5 hours. Had all of our tanks drawn, everything out of the storage and into the desert. Of course, we had no radios or no fills for our radios. We had no ammunition or anything that would actually help us in case the Iraqis tried to preempt it and push south real quick, which we knew they couldn't, but kind of makes you feel like, I'm not really quite ready yet. We pushed out into the deserts of Kuwait, and these large camps, and our sister brigade, 3rd Brigade. When were you there, Troy?
Just behind, probably 30 days back.
Okay, so 3rd Brigade, which included 269 Armor later on for you. So they were there as part of an ongoing operation. A lot of people forget that we had been fighting Saddam. And again, how do you define war? What's warfare? We had been maneuvering against Saddam for a decade almost, since Desert Storm. We had no fly zones. We bombed him every so often. Anytime he flinched, we moved brigades. And so there was a permanent brigade down in Kuwait to take care of any contingencies. So our sister brigade from Fort Benning When they found out that we were coming in and taking their camp and they had to move, they stripped everything. So we got in there's nothing there, you know, and so it was fun. But we did all of our preparations, and one of that is putting together the maps. And so all of the leadership in the companies and battalions are piecing together all these maps. You have to cut them, fold them, laminate them, keep the wind and sand and all that out. And then they say, oh, change of plan, because we did a series of maps over here. That's where the Marines, I guess, decided they were going to go. So then they said, nope, need new maps. So we did these. And this pulls out a little bit all the way out to here as well. There's a whole other section back here. But we prepared the maps and started doing the sketches of the anticipated fights. And so we had, what we did is we mentally drilled through. We did what we called a sticky drill. And our sticky drill was we would set the battlefield up, and the battalion staff would run through the fight, and the commanders would run through it. I'm doing this now while he's doing this while I'm doing this. S2, what's the enemy doing? Enemy's doing this. Okay, we can't do that. We got to move. We got to change the plan, adjust the plan. So we built in adaptability, adaptiveness, okay, into the planning, as well as we also had some other types of rehearsals. So I set up 5 sand tables, which is a mock-up of the fights that we expected, and each was probably about 3/4 the size of this room, and it had all of these graphics on each of them. And my intent was I wanted each and every soldier to be able to walk their way through each fight without being prompted, without notes or anything else.
Sand table, help us to imagine what it looks like. I mean, it's sort of sand because it's like a desert, sort of a little bitty desert that you...
Well, so we're literally in the sand. If you're doing a wooded terrain, you would build a mock-up of trees and all that stuff. So this one literally, though, is a sand table because most of it was in the desert. Now, we didn't have time for modeling, so we're not like carving out 3-dimensional buildings and bridges and all that stuff. But we laid all this out, and we would walk through it, and I would have subordinate leaders walk through it as well. I'm out, XO, you take over. So something's happened to me, now he's got to fight the company. What's he doing? Who's stepping up for him? And we just went through it. Another rehearsal we did was, so every morning, an old tradition was this thing called stand to, because the enemy likes to come at you early morning as, you know, either the sun's rising and blinding you, or there's clouds and you can't see or whatever. So the old tradition was everyone got up bright and early, you manned your systems and your positions, and once everyone was sufficiently awake, the battalion is ready to fight if the fight is there to be had, then you go, okay, now stand down. Well, our stand to, after the battalion commander said stand down, I'd say, white, move out, phase line Hannah, blue, what are you doing? And start to maneuver them through this, and suddenly tanks would pull out of the battalion line, out of the perimeter of that assembly area, and we would go off somewhere, and we would rehearse that fight out in the desert. And then one other thing that we did was defile drills. And so the basic of a defile drill is I've got to get through a point. I got to get from point A to point B. And generally, there's some danger involved. Think of the battlefields out there in Gettysburg that we looked at today. How would you have gotten along that railroad cut, or along those IV lines that we're talking about, or through a pass between Little and Big Round Top? And so you want to get observation going on. You want to get fires to obscure the enemy. You want to secure the near side. You want to secure the far side. You want to clear through it. And then you want to push your main body through it. And you keep doing that over and over and over. And this fight is nothing but a series of those things. And because you don't know everything that's going on, it really comes down to battle drills and well-disciplined, well-prepared force, so that you can make an adjustment on the move, and you know that that variance is going to be limited. Okay, the response to that is limited. You do it exactly as we planned. The big fight's being taken care of by someone higher. They're maneuvering us using these lines on the map.